I mean, sometimes I look at childhood deaths and I feel with the culture the pain of a young life not living out its dreams. But then a kind of little rascally part of my mind says, imagine we're all here in the 4th grade. We've all been born into the 4th grade, and somebody comes along and says, you're going on to the 5th grade early. And everybody in the 4th grade says, no, no, don't leave us. You're so young. And the other person's only going to the 5th grade. And I get a feeling at times that we are so enamored of where we think we are that we're not really, that it colors our judgment about how long people should live. I really have a sense that, and my guru said this at one point, nobody dies a minute too late or a minute too soon. Now I have to figure out why it could happen to that person at that moment, you know, or feel it and understand it in my heart, but not judge it. Not judge it. Yeah. Yes? I think you change a stigma by not holding it. That's the first thing you do. And if you're even against the stigma, it's got you. So it's a lot to get beyond stigma, to just be with the person behind the stigma. That's really what you're doing. But for you to do that, you've got to get beyond the stigma or your reaction to it. It's interesting. Yeah. Questions? Sir? Oh, man. Aha. How do you keep your center when everybody around you is losing theirs or has lost theirs? Well, I'll tell you, what you usually do is you pick battles you can win now and then, and you don't go near the really heavy things unless you have to. And if you have to go near them, you usually drown for a while, and then you sputter to life again and realize you've gotten caught in this stuff. And you just barely hold on, and then you start to get stronger again. That's usually what happens. Once you understand what this process of this curriculum of awakening is about, then that situation is like Kali has come with her tongue dripping blood to purify you. And you'd say, oh, wow, instead of being surrounded by satsang or sangha, I'm surrounded by total illusion. See? I remember the moment when I'd been thrown out of Harvard, and there was a press conference, because I was the first person in 6,000 years to be thrown out of Harvard. And the press was surrounding me, the television, the radio, and they were all looking at me like I was a loser because I had taken on Harvard and lost. And I felt like somebody who had lost a big fight and would now be sweeping the gym. But the predicament was that inside myself, I felt like I'd won. And I said, because I was now connected with this deeper spiritual truth in my being. And I said to myself, the psychologist in me said, that is psychosis. When everybody thinks one way and you think another way, you should give yourself a second opinion. And I turned out to be right. I thought if it's psychosis, here we go. Because you can't deny your inner truth just because it happens to be psychotic at a cultural moment in history. Because what psychosis in one moment is sainthood in another. Not always, but questions. Sir? The practice of meditation in my life. The more deeply I became involved in the journey of awakening, the more I began to see the predicament I was in relation to my own mind, and see that I was incredibly trapped in identification with my thoughts, my desires, my stuff. And it was in that appreciation that I first started to enter into meditation as a practice that promised that if I would use some discipline in undertaking it, it would help me extricate my awareness from identification with my thought. Not to deny the thought, but not to be trapped by it. Okay? So I went into, at that time, Theravadan Buddhism, Vipassana meditation. Very simple, following your breath, rising and falling, following your steps, lifting, pushing, putting place. And I developed some samadhi or concentration. And then you take that concentration and you start to examine your mind with that concentrated mind. And you start to break through into other levels of awareness. And this just happens with discipline of pursuing one of these paths. What happened was, over years, I've practiced very many different kind of meditation strategies. And I'm a kind of an eclectic dilettante, jerk. But what I found is that every one of them worked with another part of my being and helped me. I could see that each one started to have a payoff for me. And I started to be much more interested in a whole lot of other kinds of meditation practices, many more devotional, a lot of different kinds. Am I dealing with your question? Yeah. Yes? The soul is the ocean that thinks it's a soul. The thought that it is a soul is what reincarnates. Okay? I mean, it's still a drop in the ocean, so it's still whatever it is. It just isn't, you don't stand inside of it any longer. You're the whole ocean. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. I didn't turn. Isn't that nice? Well, who are they U-turns to? I mean, you're watching it all. But that's their problem. What are you upset about? Well, as you do inner work through whatever method you do, you become different. It's not like you have something, it's you are something. Or you open to a deeper part of what you are. And that isn't exactly takeable away because it's what you are, right? That's their problem. If you get caught in it, that's your problem. You're saying, I get caught in their judgments of me because I'm trying to convince them I'm right, you said. I would say you hold what you believe and be what you believe. One of my friends called from a mental hospital and he said, you know I'm the Buddha. He said, but when I tell my mother that, she's not the least bit appreciative. But he said, when I am the Buddha, she really likes it. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Right. He said that in talking about the chakras, he's heard me talk a lot about the lower three and a little bit about the fourth, but he's heard precious little about the fifth, sixth, and seventh. Well, that's because I talk from where I am. I've only heard tell about those other chakras. No, I'd say that my ability to do this is an example of fifth chakra, the gift of Saraswati. I would say that the wisdom you and I have when we transcend knowledge, the wisdom that we are, when you simplify and go in and into the place where you are connected with the universe, the wisdom you are. I love that. What happens is, I start to go, the wisdom you are, and it just takes me into the wisdom you are. And then I'm not the least bit interested in where I was a moment before. Now, it's interesting, when you're alone thinking, you don't mind doing that at all. But we are with each other, we keep feeling we're supposed to be linear. I get you, and the second point is, and I watch myself being very frustrated with me because I'm not more linear, but yet I don't think linearly at all. And the fun is, since we are recognizing a space of our consciousness by being together, the nonlinear as well as the linear does the whole process. What was the question I was just responding to? Huh? Aha, the chakras. The wisdom. And then this one is where you aren't. You disappear. You're the drop in the ocean. You're the ocean. You're beyond ocean. You're the thousand-petal lotus. So I may drop up there for a second, but you know, I hardly have time to see the view. I'm really quite content being in the fourth chakra, to tell you the truth. It's been a long, hard struggle to get there. But as you get older, it gets easier. Sweet as they may be, yes. Well, the beauty of the Guru Kripa is what I was talking about before with the imaginary playmate. What I have is a being with me all the time who is a mirror showing me what I still have to do or where I still might be holding, because I see something when I look at him. And as I get further along in my connection to him, it ceases to be relational anymore. It is more of where we share a presence together. It is not I have become him, I am far from becoming Maharaji. And he's dead and I'm alive. I mean, we are not one. And yet there is a way in which that presence is transcending the way in which I am a seeker and he is a guru. And that's a very delicious stage of my existence at the moment. Yes. Yes. There was a moment in 1968 when I had been given the name Ramdas, which meant a name for Hanuman, the monkey god of Hinduism. And I was living at a temple, and I went to a nearby temple, and I sat daily in front of this 8-foot cement orange monkey with his chest ripped open, in which were a male and female form, Ram and Sita. And he had a mace over his shoulder. And I remember thinking about all of my colleagues back at Harvard and what they would think if they saw me there, let alone all my Jewish relatives sitting in front of, worshipfully, a large orange cement monkey. But what I was doing a very ancient spiritual practice, actually, which is the practice of devotion, which uses dualism to go beyond dualism. And so that you go into the essence of Hanuman, and then Hanuman is pointed towards Ram, and then you go through Ram, and then you go beyond. So I just see it as a method. I don't worship cement monkeys. I am using it as a method to get free, just in the same way as I would use the halakhic law to get free in Judaism. And I hear, like, I have a lot of difficulty in Judaism, for example, because there are ways in the halakhic law, for example, where it says if you don't have a vision, if you have a vision and that vision isn't the same vision that the great visionaries had, the prophets, and you articulate that vision, you are a false prophet. And I can't hear any instruction that tells me to invalidate my own intuitive sense of what is the closest to my truth. I really want to hold, in the politics of consciousness, the freedom to trust that intuitive thing. So I have a hard time with things like that. So I play with it a lot. I mean, I play with all of these issues a lot. But I don't see, and that's why I'm like a Hindu Jew or something like that, you know? I can't really see how I can say one way up the mountain is the only way up the mountain. It doesn't feel that way. Am I dealing with your question or not? Okay. Yes. She's asking about the experience of emptiness and the comparison between the experience of emptiness you might have with psychedelics, or entheogens as they're now called, and or meditation, right? Is that the question? Well, I think the word emptiness is probably really not a good word to use, because it obviously isn't empty. That's the first reason why it's not a good word to use. I mean, it is full of everything, it just isn't manifest. So it's like the unmanifest, it's where it's all and everything and nothing at the same moment. because it hasn't taken form yet into something, and yet it is everything. So in a way, you would say that one of the ways of thinking about God is as that unmanifest everything or nothing. And for example, in meditation practice, you can go into nirvikalpa samadhi, formless emptiness, through bringing your concentration in so tight you can go between two thoughts. You go into the space between two thoughts, and there is no universe. And when you do that, you come into an experience in which, or see, there's where the words fall down, because it is not an experience. It is a moment in which experiencer and experience are no longer in a dualistic relationship to one another. So there is no experience, so there's nothing. But you are everything. That's what that emptiness is we're talking about. Okay? Is that coming through? And then the question of the difference between psychedelics and meditation in terms of that experience. I don't know that I'm really clear in my own mind about it. I'll tell you what my guru said, which I thought is pretty interesting. He said, your medicine, meaning LSD, he said it would allow you to come into the presence of Christ and have Christ darshan. You could be with, he said, but you could only stay for 2 hours and then you'd have to leave. He said it would be better to become Christ than visit him, but your medicine won't do that. Okay? So what I heard was that the medicine was an astral analog of emptiness rather than emptiness. But to me, that was still pretty useful along the way. I still like having 2 hours with Christ. Okay, is that dealing with your question? Yes. How psychology, how to work with psychological, huh? Psychodynamics, yeah. Well, I now see psychodynamics as structural things of the mind. Where are you? Yeah. Structural things of the mind. And it seems to me that to the extent you get a little leg up into some kind of mindful state or witness or some kind of spiritual consciousness, then you can see psychodynamics more comfortably because you're less identified with them, because your awareness has come up. Like somebody will come and say, I'm depressed. And I'll say, are you really depressed? They'll say, yeah, I'm really depressed. I say, are you totally depressed? Yes, I'm totally depressed. I say, well, is the person that's telling me you're depressed? And they say, well, no, that person's just telling you. Aha, see. I say, there's a part of you that isn't depressed. And as you cultivate that part, actually, through practices, you get to the point where you can deal with the psychodynamic stuff much more lightly than when you are totally identified with it. So my sort of snide comment has been, if you want psychotherapy, be sure you don't go to somebody who thinks they're a therapist. See, because if they think they're real, then you must be real as the client. And who needs to be a client all their life? So be careful. It's human being meeting human being through the vehicle of massage or therapy or whatever it is. And if you aren't busy being a therapist, you see the other being as a soul who's got some psychodynamic stuff they're working out. It's like going in for fender and body repair on your old car, you know, something like that. And you're very compassionate towards it, and you don't belittle it, but you don't make a life's work out of it. Sir?
This has to do with
Relationships.
spiritual aspects and love.
Relationship, spiritual. Oh, you're going to tell me the question. Go ahead.
My wife and I are we've been married about 7 times after we met, we read our guru. We both had very much the same mindset. As time went on, we ended up going to India. We lived in India for about 4 years. And we got into the celibacy thing, okay? Which is not
Yeah.
really work with marriages that well, but I honor celibacy in the name of that person.
Got it.
Okay. Anyway, we came back from India, and I realized that I was completely full of sexual desire. And wow, what to do with all this?
Another horny celibate, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, we took some space. I had a lot of other issues, like just codependent. She always took care of the money. I didn't know how to do all that. Anyway, we took space.
I'll repeat the question in a second, in a paraphrased form. He's getting to the question.
And we find that through this taking space, our love has just gotten much, much deeper, much, much fuller, and we're able to honor each other. And our relationship's about as big as it's never been. And she's returning to India for about 4 months now. We're not going to see each other. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I still don't really know how to deal. I still have these sexual things.
Paraphrase the question. His wife, with whom he is very close, and they love each other deeply, she's going back to India, and he's horny. That's part of it. That is part of it. Huh? Is that part of it? Yeah, that is part of it. Okay. I mean, now this is an interesting predicament. I mean, I hear it. There are a number of choices. We can ask Jocelyn Elders. What? You can honor her spiritual chastity, but you've got to be honoring your own truth as well. There is the conflict, yes. That becomes the spiritual practice right there, that tension. And your job is to extricate yourself from that tension to the point where you don't care which way it goes. And that's using that as a yoga. Doesn't mean you still won't be horny, but you won't be busy being horny. Do you hear what I'm saying at all or not?
I hear it, but it still doesn't.
What? You know all this stuff. I mean, what I'm hearing is that you and your wife have tasted very deep spiritual truth with one another, and you've experienced it in part in a celibate environment in India. And when you came back here, you realized that there was a lot of stuff that had been pushed under the rug that was still around in you. And you were working with it, the two of you were working with all of this as well as you could, but it gets very complicated. And at some point, she decided, now maybe I got it wrong there, she decided to go back to India.
Necessary to go back for some time. I feel very much like I want to stay here.
Okay, well, see, when people come to me, for example, this isn't your case, but they come to me and they say, should I get divorced or not? I always say, since they came to me as a spiritual person, I say, it doesn't matter. They say, well, it matters to me. I said, well, there's the problem. I'm sure you went through a culture shock. It's a very horny culture. There's a lot of stuff arousing prurient interest everywhere you look. You know, and if you're going to buy those mind states, you're going to go the trip. And that's the predicament. You come back into a culture and everybody's saying the same stuff, so you think that must be reality. What it is a conspiracy of a culture to define reality a certain way. And the game isn't interesting enough to be caught in those kind of traps. It's worth working on yourself not to be caught. Doesn't matter which one you do. Not satisfying you, but we're working on it. Questions? Yes. No. No, the journey of awakening isn't choice, unfortunately. The question is the journey of awakening choice? I'd say no, it isn't. I would say that the journey of awakening is karma, and that that's law, and that it unfolds that you decide you're going to come here tonight. And it unfolds that from this, something shifts just a tiny bit, and then you decide you're going to do that, and then something else goes. And if you stood back far enough, you'd see the kind of lawful unfolding, including your mindset that said, I think I'll go, and here Ram does. So where was the choice? I mean, choice is only when you have awareness that's free. So the desire for freedom is still a programmed thing in you. You're still conditional. And you're working for an unconditional awareness. Did I deal with the question, or do you want to say it again? Hello? What? Well, willpower and concentration, like I talk about discipline and all that, I kind of think that's all kind of bullshit, actually. I really think it's this horrible, this thing, we got to get behind ourselves and push, or we'll, it's an old Freudian thing that if you don't have the superego, the id's going to take over and destroy everything. And I just don't buy that trip about human beings. I really don't. I'd rather say to somebody, lazy, be lazy, and then see what happens. When you need to go to the toilet, you're not lazy. See, and why shouldn't life be like going to a toilet? I mean, why shouldn't it come out of that place? What is all this fraudulence? Like we've got to convince ourselves that we need to go to the toilet. Yes. She's asking about channeling, whether I think it's a tool for guidance, or is it useful, or is it whatever. I wrote a preface for the books of Emmanuel, which are books about a disembodied being that speaks through a woman named Pat Rodegast, who he doesn't possess her, he just talks to her, whatever that's called. And I realized over the years that there had been many times when I had been talked to about various beings from other places sending messages. And as I looked over those messages, I realized that all beings that didn't have bodies weren't bright. Okay? That there were a lot of schlock astral beings who were losing when they were alive and then say, well, I'll send back messages, and send back losing messages now too, see? So I realized that you just couldn't, just because somebody was disembodied didn't mean you should elevate them. They should still have the same criteria you'd impose for anybody else. Does it intuitively feel right? Does it fit in with my life? And what I've come to, and I said in that preface, was I have no idea whether Pat Rodegast, through whom Emmanuel comes, is just a vertical schizophrenic that has no knowledge of this other being at all as herself, or whether Emmanuel is galumphing through the astral something, having pity upon these slobs down there and sending the, like, I said to him, Emmanuel, I like him because he's got a sense of humor. I said, Emmanuel, what should I tell people about dying, since I talk to people about dying all the time? He said, Ram Dass, tell them it's absolutely safe. I mean, that is a jewel. It's worth it to accept astral beings just for that one-liner. I mean, he said it's like taking off a tight shoe. Fascinating. So what I do is I listen to stuff that comes by my consciousness, and if it's useful, I use it, and if it isn't, I don't have to judge it. I just say I don't have any business with that. Okay? Sir? About? Well, Kelly was a quadriplegic that I knew for many years, and many of us did and loved and treasured very much. He became quadriplegic when he was before puberty, and I knew him at around 28 or 30 or something like that. And when I met Kelly, Kelly was brought to the hall, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was back, and he was and he had a little box in front of him, and so I went over and I knelt down in front of him, and my reaction to how deeply incapacitated he was very, very powerful. And he processed out that he wanted help with his anger. So, I mean, it was like the contract was made. And I realized that if I was going to help him with his anger, I had to get through my reactivity to his predicament, because I was so busy responding to his symbolic value that I couldn't get to him behind it all. So that took me I'd say about 6 months of seeing Kelly and visiting every few weeks or whenever. And we got to the point where I didn't even notice, I mean, I didn't have to notice that Kelly was quadriplegic at all. We just looked into one of his eyes, and he spelled out letter by letter on his little board, the words he wanted to say. And it was just like talking to any of you. It's just a different rate and a different sort of way of doing it. And as he and I made contact behind his illness, then we could both look at the anger from a non-angry place. And he really did change tremendously. He showed incredible spiritual growth. And then he got to the point where he said, I think I've had enough of this one. And the predicament was that he couldn't move. He was totally dependent on other human beings to keep alive. So none of them could afford to help him die without putting themselves in a tremendously high-risk legal situation. So I said to Kel, well, the only thing you could do, because the only control he seemed to have was with his throat muscle, the only thing you could really do is stop eating. He said, could I do that? I said, sure. So he did. He stopped eating, and he went for, I assumed after 2 weeks he would, but he went like 40 some odd days. And then it turned out that I didn't know, but he had been eating sucrose and fruit juices and things. He hadn't been really fasting to death. And so he was getting upset. He said, would I be upset with him if he ate? I said, of course I wouldn't. I want you to stay around. I think you are a precious commodity. I think you're a living saint in my life, and I want you here. You got to do what you want, and I don't take away your freedom to do it. And so then he did 2 weeks without anything, I think just water. And he got very, very weak. And then he said he really wanted to go, and he had asked somebody to help him, and that person agreed to help him. And he died. Is that the question you're asked? Yeah. We should stop shortly. Yes.
Talk about fear a little bit.
Fear. And getting past fear. I'll tell you, it's 11:05. We'll go 10 more minutes till 11:15, then stop. Okay? And those of you that need to leave, oh my God, it's 11. Go. Don't be afraid. But if you're afraid, stay. So I'm going to talk about fear. The root, let's just go back to the beginnings. The root of fear is ignorance. The ignorance is that you are a separate entity. As long as you identify with your separateness, there will be fear. As long as you extricate yourself from that identification, you will enter a part of your being which has nothing to be afraid of. The separate entity has a lot to be afraid of because it's going to cease to exist in practically no time. And it's also going to go through all its stuff. So there is fear in separateness. And as you awaken from that and balance it, that you are separate and you are not separate, that part of you that is not separate is not in fear. And that is the part that balances and makes you able to be with the fear without making believe it doesn't exist or without being taken over by it. So that you can be, it doesn't mean fear goes away. You may still feel the fear, but the other part of your consciousness will be able to say, ah, fear. So instead of I'm afraid, it's more like I'm afraid is one level and there's fear is another level. And as you keep cultivating that other part of your consciousness, at least it does for me, I find that the fears just don't have the seduction anymore. That there's a part of me that sees the fear as just my mind grabbed hold again and let go. Am I dealing with your question? Sort of. Yes. How about judgment? It's a terrible question. How about judgment? What I have found is that I was a very, very judging person. It's interesting, I noticed that when I go out in the woods and I look at aspens and I look at oak and I look at pinyon, I don't sit around judging them. I just appreciate them. But the minute I come near humans, see, I mean, I can even do, with cats, I can even appreciate different cats, but humans, I go into a judging mode. And I think that has to do with my fear, my own fears as a separate entity, you know, and I'm positioning myself in a comfortable way by making myself the judge. And I would say that every time I find myself judging now, I use it as a technique by saying, take the thing you were judging and turn it into appreciation. See? Just appreciate how it is. Like when you meet the worst slimy thief, enjoy the essence of slimy thiefness at the same moment as you're saying, I won't have anything more to do with that guy. You know, a person, could be a woman. Okay, am I dealing with the question? It's flip it around. And I do, I intentionally flip it. Because I feel when I get into my judging mind, I get extremely curmudgeon-y. And I don't even like me at all. It's no fun to be a judge. Yes? What would I say to young people that want to use drugs? Well, I'll tell you, that's a hard one in this culture at this moment. I would say, if they would ask me, I would say a number of things. I would say that there are different stages of life, and there is a stage where you have to get your act together on the ground floor, developing your somebodyness. And it may be a little premature to go after your nobodyness until you get your somebodyness in order. That's one of the first things I would say. So just get your scenario in order. When you're busy with your sex life, economic life, family independence, that's a hard time to be also experimenting on your consciousness. Might not be the optimum moment for that. And then if you are going to do that, then I would invite you to get educated as well as you can about what leads to what and what to not lead to what. And when you're being educated, you will see that the things that we have realized are that set and setting are terribly important to the nature of the experience that one has with psychedelics anyway. And the predicament is that the setting in this culture has a lot of paranoia connected with it. So that when you start to experiment as a young person, you've got to realize you're doing it in a culture that is really hostile to what you're doing. And that's going to be something you're going to take into the session until you're a real master at not getting caught in stuff. So I would say this may not be the optimum culture for that kind of experimentation at this moment. If you are, after all that education, you're going to do it, then I want to help you create as safe and deep and useful a space for that experience as you possibly can have. And I hope you would share with me what you have, what happens to you, both the pros and the cons, and let's stay connected. Because my models and judgment about it all can cut me off from you if I'm not careful. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Just maybe a small light and light. I want to share an experience that was happening as I was on my way back to, for lack of a better term, Las Vegas. Las Vegas, Nevada. From being out in Nevada with the site demonstration, very close to the 504-year anniversary of the Indigenous Peoples Resistance in Southwest Congress. And on a journey back from Nevada to the site, my friend was driving this van. He was about to run back. And he just kind of really nonchalant turned around, threw my consciousness back about 2,000 years, right? He said, as you heard, Donna had a baby, and it's a girl.
Nice story, thank you. Well, everybody, this was a great opportunity for us to be together. I really appreciate us coming together to explore truth together. It feels very sweet. Thank you.